Good morning, boys and girls. This is Grandma Sheilla with our story today. Well, our story happened many, many years ago, but it's still a very good story. It's called A Silver Christmas. When I was a boy, our family lived in North Carolina, down a long dirt road in a small framed house surrounded by tobacco fields and cornfields. This was during the Great Depression, with 25% of the workforces not having any jobs. Dad worked 10 hours a day, 7 days a week, in a 2-man operation of a flour mill, grinding corn for the local farmers. Times were really hard, and some of the farmers were unable to pay with cash. So Dad's labor was paid in ground corn. Our house was built from lumber milled on my grandfather's farm. We did not have electricity, and our lighting source was a kerosene lamp, which I carried around the house when I needed it. We had a tin wood-burning stove in the middle of what might be called our living room, which was the total heat source for the whole house. My sister and I slept upstairs, and on those cold winter nights, we'd grab a blanket off our bed, run down the staircase, and hold it around the stove, wrapping our bodies in it then, and dashed back up the stairs into bed. Since we had no inside plumbing, a trip to the toilet meant going out the back door, walking past our woodshed to an outhouse at the end of our garden. I might add here that in that outdoor facility, we were never without reading material. We always had the use of the Sears and Roebuck catalog. Well, our water supply came from a spring, which was down in a ravine about a quarter of a mile away, down through the woods in back of our house. As a boy, it was my daily task to fetch at least 2 buckets of water from that spring and bring them back to the house. But that job terrified me, for at the bottom of the spring lived a 6-inch long sand-colored crawfish, a 10-legged carnivorous predator. He would sit at the bottom of that spring, waiting for anything that he thought that he could eat to come into it, like maybe a hand or an arm. That fish would lay wait to leap out of that spring and adhere itself to my arm. With my eyes riveted on that critter, I'd muster up my courage, and with superhuman speed, I'd dip those buckets into the spring and fill them with water. Only in adulthood have I come to fully appreciate Mom and Dad and all their hard work for us in keeping our household going. As a child, I also had little understanding of the extra work involved in taking care of the needs of my little sister, who was born with cerebral palsy. I remember an occasional time or two when the county health department nurse would come to visit. They made every attempt to convince my mom and dad to send little Evelyn away to a school for handicapped children. My mom and dad flatly refused. determined that Evelyn would be raised just like any other child and attend a regular school, play with other children, and live just like any other child. As a child, Evelyn began using a walker, but then my mom saw that she was becoming very dependent on that walker. Mother took it away, insisting that Evelyn learn to walk on her own. And surprisingly, she did learn to walk. She graduated with honors from high school. She got married, and following graduation, she worked in an office at the Sears and Roebuck store until she retired. When World War II broke out, Dad got a job as a maintenance man in a low-income government housing project in Northern Virginia, just across the Potomac River from Washington, D.C. The George Pickett houses were one of 3 hastily built projects constructed to accommodate the influx of people who moved into Washington, D.C. to help the war effort. The George Pickett project consisted of 54 housing units, cinder block walls inside and out, no back door, no side windows, a single coal-burning stove, a coal bin on the side of the narrow front porch. We lived in a middle apartment in one of those units. The floors were concrete. The exciting change that I enjoyed from my North Carolina years was that each unit had electricity, running water, a shower, a toilet that really flushed, and an ice box with ice that was delivered twice a week. There was an additional thing that brightened my life. It was the Good Humor ice cream truck that made regular runs down our street, and a popsicle only cost 5 cents. Everything that we had in North Carolina was now squeezed into that tiny small apartment. A table, a few wall pictures, and an assortment of other household items. When it came to our dishes and silverware, I don't recall that we had very many plates, cups, or glasses that even matched each other. The cupboards seemed to hold a collection of odds and ends that Mother had been able to collect. Our silverware consisted of a wide variety of knives, forks, and spoons, and to my recollection, there was no complete settings. So what I mean is there was no forks or spoons or knives that all looked alike. They were all different. Well, at the age of 13, I was in the 7th grade at Thomas Jefferson Junior High School. I walked half a mile to and from school every day. Well, in that back and forth trip, I passed a dozen small stores. One day, as I passed the jewelry store, I looked in the window and saw something that attracted my attention. It was an open chest of silverware, prominently displayed, a complete set of knives, forks, and spoons, all of them the same pattern, all of them that looked alike. And they were in this beautiful wooden box with a maroon background that was all velvet and soft. I was absolutely mesmerized not something that generally a 13-year-old boy would be interested in. But they were beautiful. There were 8 matching knives. There were 8 spoons. There was 8 forks. And besides all that, there was a butter knife, a sugar spoon, a display of serving spoons, and even 8 soup spoons. The label read 1847 Rogers Brothers, America's finest silverware. I had never seen anything like that in my entire life. As I stared at the silverware, one thought consumed me. Wouldn't Mother love that? How can I get it? I wondered if I could make payments and buy it. Would it be possible to get it paid for by Christmas? Well, on that day, I had $1 in my pocket. That in itself was unusual. That was during the days when one could buy a soda pop for a nickel, a Tootsie Roll for a penny. But I had a whole $1. Right then and there, I made up my mind. I had seen my mother buy things on time before, as she called it, and I figured I could do the same. After all, it was early spring, and it would be months before December 25 rolled around. And I was sure that by that time, I could have that silverware set paid for. Well, I went into the one-man operated store, and the owner approached me. Son, what do you want? You know, young boys generally didn't go into jewelry stores. I said, Sir, I want to buy that chest of silverware that's in your window, and I'll have it paid for by Christmas. I want to give you $1 down on it. I held my breath, hoping that he would allow me to open an account with his store. Without hesitation, he reached under the counter. He pulled out an elongated wooden box. He opened it, and then he pulled out a 3x5 card. Son, what's your name? He asked, businesslike. Noel Shanko. Your address? 1843 South 12th Street. Do you have a phone? Yeah. Owens, 5670. As I left the store, I paused once more to look in the window at my silverware. I also began to realize that I had my work cut out for me. I don't recall the exact cost of that silverware, but as I remember, it was around $100. $100. You know, today, that silverware would probably have cost $1,000. But he was going to have to somehow make a whole $100. His task was enormous. 2 or 3 days later, as I was going home from school, I saw a man talking with one of my school buddies outside the school. I walked up to them and heard what the man was saying. He was trying to get my friend to take a job delivering newspapers. My friend didn't want anything to do with a job, but I sure did. So I took on that paper route. It delivered through those funny apartments where we lived. Every time that I delivered enough papers and picked up how much the people would have to pay for the newspapers, I was given a little amount of money. And every time I had another dollar bill or more, I headed to the jewelry store to pay on my account. Every penny was 1 penny closer to buying that silverware for my mother. Then my paper manager, as I called the man who delivered the newspapers to all the newspaper carriers, started taking 3 or 4 boys out in the evenings to go door to door trying to get more people to buy papers. Well, I latched onto that opportunity too, and during all those knocking on the doors, I managed to sign up several new subscribers. Each one that I got to subscribe for the newspaper, that manager gave me another 50 cents. I worked so hard. And with those compiled 50 cents, I ran back to the jewelry store to add more money to pay against the cost of that silverware. In the project we lived at the bottom of the hill, in the last group of apartments, in front of our house unit, there was an open field. My dad got permission to use that field to grow tomatoes. Every spring, with a hand-pushed plow, he would plow that field. And then he and I would plant around 100 tomato plants. My job was to keep the weeds out of all those tomatoes. And as the tomatoes came in, I'd pick the ripe ones and wash them. I next lined them up into 2 elongated wicker baskets, each row of 3 tomatoes weighing 1 pound. And then, with a piece of cardboard on top, I'd make another layer of tomatoes. I'd line up that second layer. The same steps were repeated with the second basket, and so on, going door to door with those baskets in hand. With my standard speech, I'd say, "My dad and I raised these tomatoes 10 cents a pound, 3 pounds for a quarter." I had quite a business. Dad would give me 50 cents for each basket I sold, and it was off to the jewelry store. That store owner got to the place where when he saw me coming through the door, he would reach under the counter and pull out my 3x5 card to add how much money I was bringing that day, so I could see how much I still owed. With the money from raising and selling the tomatoes, Dad and Mom would go to the Safeway store, and they would buy cases of canned tomatoes and lima beans, which on sale would cost 10 cents a can then. We bought enough cases to last us through the winter. That selling-buying system saved Mother a lot of hard work in going through the canning process in that teeny tiny kitchen we had. Every apartment in the Pickett homes had a coal-burning stove. Anyone who has used coal knows that if you allow the last chunk of coal to get cold, that fire will go out. And a coal fire is really hard to get started again. Well, Dad saw this as an opportunity. He used his evenings and his weekends to go out and cut wood and cut it up into chunks and then made it into fine kindling that would start that coal fire right back up. Well, during the winter months, Dad got off his work. He would fill 20 or more bushels with that kindling, and he would load those baskets on a homemade trailer that Dad had made, and he would drive up and down the narrow streets in front of the apartments. My job was to go to the door and ask the people if they needed any more kindling. We charged 60 cents a bushel. For every bushel that I sold, I made 10 cents. And all those dimes together were hauled back to the jewelry store. Another source of income was cutting the lawns. The lawns in front of each apartment unit of George Pickett homes were very narrow, measuring about 8 feet wide and some 24 feet long. Well, I could mow those little lawns, the entire lawn, in about 3 or 4 swishes through it with the lawnmower. Loaner lawnmowers, the old push rotary kind, of course, were available in the maintenance building where Dad worked. Well, I mowed lawns all that summer at 10 cents a lawn. And once in a great while, some kind soul would give me a nickel or a dime as a tip. Again, many trips back and forth to that jewelry store. I was getting there. Oh my, did I have to work hard. But I couldn't wait for Mother to see her Christmas present. I also found that I could order flower seeds from the catalog and sell those pretty flowers door to door. I did the same with a product known as cloverine salve. In those days, it was something that moms could put on scratches and burns and things on their children. Those cans sold for 25 cents each, and I made a few pennies every time I sold one. It was about 2 weeks before Christmas, and it had come down to the wire. It was close. Was I going to have enough money? Well, then, one day, in my hand, I held the last $2. I went into the jewelry store and laid those $2 on the counter. The owner reached under the counter, pulled out my card, and do you know what he wrote on it this time? Paid in full. I think he was as excited about it as I was. Then he reached up on the shelf. I thought, what's he doing? The silverware set was still sitting in the front window of the store. But no, he reached up on the shelf and he brought down a brand new set of that silverware, one that hadn't been opened at or looked at. And he wrapped it up in brown paper. And oh, so carefully he gave it to me. I think he knew what that silverware was costing me. When I got home, I was careful that no one would see me, and I hid my chest of silver under my bed. On Christmas Eve, about midnight, I got out of bed and crept down the stairs into the living room with that chest of silver, and I placed it under all the other little gifts that were under that tree. I didn't sleep much that night. I could hardly wait for morning. Well, on Christmas morning, I got up early. It was my job to hand out the presents. And naturally, I saved my silverware for last. Then the time came. I pulled the chest from under the tree and said, "Mama, this is for you." I watched as she unwrapped the gift and lifted the lid. The only words that I could use to describe my mother's face was amazement, disbelief, and a pride of a parent that I'd never seen before. Tears ran down her cheeks as she hugged and kissed me. In years to come, later as a father and grandfather, I have come to more fully understand how overwhelmed she must have felt. I have no idea whatsoever as to what I received that Christmas. It wasn't worth remembering. What was important was what I gave. I experienced a feeling unmatched by any other gift in my whole lifetime. Truly, it is more blessed to give than to receive. Well, years and years later, my mother died. The one thing that I wanted more than anything was that silverware. Since her death, we had only used it once or twice on really special occasions. And I must admit, even though I am 80 years old now, with memories of that long ago Christmas flooding over me, I have a hard time holding back the tears as well. I had learned the blessing of giving. Thank you, boys and girls. I will see you next week. Bye-bye now.